Two brilliant Harvard students vanished without a trace in 1992. 8 years later, I found something hidden in an old diary that changed everything we thought we knew about their disappearance. What I discovered between those yellowed pages wasn't just a love story gone wrong. It was evidence of something far more sinister happening in the shadows of America's most prestigious university. Stay until the end, because what I found in that diary will haunt you for weeks. I've been running Crimson Books, a small antiquarian bookshop near Harvard Square, for over 30 years. In all that time, I've handled thousands of old books, journals, and manuscripts. Most carry ordinary stories, lecture notes, grocery lists, forgotten poems, but some books hold secrets that were never meant to be discovered. This is the story of one such discovery, and how it unraveled a mystery that had haunted Cambridge for nearly a decade. It was October 2000 when Mrs. Eleanor Whitman brought me 3 boxes of books from her late grandmother's estate. The old woman had been a Harvard librarian for 40 years, and her collection was impressive. First editions of Hawthorne, annotated copies of Thoreau, and dozens of leather-bound journals from the early 1900s. I was cataloguing everything when I noticed something odd about one particular diary. It was bound in deep burgundy leather, but unlike the others, this one had pages that seemed newer, whiter. The handwriting inside was modern, definitely not from the early century, like the binding suggested. The first entry was dated September 15th, 1992. "Today I met someone who will change everything," it read. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, urgent. As I flipped through more pages, names began to appear. Sarah Chen and Michael Reeves. Those names sent a chill down my spine. I remembered them from the news coverage 8 years earlier. They were the Harvard couple who had vanished without explanation, becoming one of Cambridge's most baffling unsolved cases. Sarah was a senior majoring in psychology, brilliant and ambitious, known for her thesis on manipulative personality disorders. Michael was in his final year of pre-med, captain of the rowing team, beloved by everyone who knew him. They had been dating for 2 years when they simply disappeared on October 12th, 1992. Their dorm rooms were found exactly as they'd left them. Books open on desks, clothes laid out for the next day, Sarah's coffee still warm in her mug. It was as if they had stepped out for a moment and never returned. The investigation consumed the campus for months. Police interviewed hundreds of students and faculty. Sarah's research advisor mentioned she had been acting strangely in the weeks before her disappearance, staying late in the psychology building, asking unusual questions about case studies involving missing persons. Michael's teammates said he seemed distracted during practice, constantly checking his watch, looking over his shoulder, but no one could piece together what had happened to them. The case eventually went cold, filed away with dozens of other unsolved disappearances. Until I opened that diary, the entries revealed a different story entirely. According to Sarah's own words, she had been investigating something she called the collection. She wrote about discovering a pattern among missing students dating back to 1975. Young couples, always academically gifted, always disappearing without a trace. She had found connections between the disappearances and certain faculty members, donors to the university, people with access to student records and schedules. The more she investigated, the more paranoid her entries became. "They know I'm watching," she wrote. "Michael thinks I'm losing my mind, but I've seen them following us." Her final entries were the most disturbing. "We've been invited to a private study group," she wrote on October 10th. "Professor Hartwell says it's for exceptional students only. He mentioned research opportunities, connections that could change our futures. Michael is excited, but something feels wrong." The way Hartwell looked at me when he extended the invitation, it reminded me of the case studies I've been reading about predatory behavior. The last entry, dated October 12th, was brief and frantic. "We're going tonight. If something happens to us, look for Professor Edmund Hartwell, look for the collection. They're not just studying us, they're collecting us." I sat in my shop until 3 in the morning, reading and rereading those entries. Professor Edmund Hartwell, the name was familiar. I remembered him from the news coverage, actually. He had been interviewed as one of Sarah's professors, expressing concern for her well-being, helping coordinate search efforts. He had seemed genuinely worried about his missing students, but according to Sarah's diary, he was the one who had lured them to their fate. I debated whether to take the diary to police, but I needed to learn more first. The next day, I began my own investigation. I discovered that Professor Hartwell had left Harvard abruptly in December 1992, just 2 months after Sarah and Michael disappeared. The official story was that he had taken a research position in Europe, but I couldn't find any record of where he went. More disturbing, I found newspaper clippings going back 20 years documenting the disappearances Sarah had mentioned. 12 couples in total, all brilliant students, all vanished without explanation. The pattern was undeniable once you knew to look for it. I spent 3 weeks diving deeper into each case. Lisa and David Martinez, 1975, both pre-med students, disappeared during their senior year after being invited to an exclusive research symposium. Jennifer Walsh and Thomas Chen, 1978, chemistry majors who vanished after receiving invitations to a private laboratory tour. The list went on, each couple disappearing after being approached by someone in authority, someone they trusted. What chilled me most was discovering that Professor Hartwell had been at Harvard during every single disappearance, though he had held different positions over the years: teaching assistant, visiting researcher, associate professor. I found his employment records buried in Harvard's administrative archives. Edmund Hartwell had been hired in 1974 as a graduate research assistant in the psychology department. His doctoral thesis, completed in 1976, was titled Preservation of Intellectual Capital, a study in human resource management. Even the academic language couldn't disguise what was essentially a manifesto on treating brilliant minds as collectible objects. His advisor's notes expressed concern about Hartwell's unusual theoretical approaches and troubling perspective on human subjects. What truly disturbed me was learning about Hartwell's background before Harvard. I tracked down his undergraduate records at Yale, where he had studied under Dr. Margaret Kellison, a controversial psychologist who believed that certain individuals possessed intellectual gifts too valuable to be wasted on ordinary lives. Kellison's research had been discredited, and she was dismissed from Yale in 1972 for conducting unethical experiments on students. 2 of her research subjects had committed suicide, and 3 others suffered complete psychological breaks. Hartwell was her most devoted student, and apparently her intellectual heir. During my research, I contacted Dr. Amanda Foster, a retired Harvard psychology professor who had worked alongside Hartwell in the 1980s. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near campus, though she seemed nervous about discussing her former colleague. Edmund was brilliant, she told me, but there was something deeply wrong with him. He saw people as data points, not human beings. I remember him talking about his students like they were specimens in a laboratory. He was particularly interested in couples. He said romantic attachment created fascinating behavioral patterns that could be studied indefinitely. Dr. Foster revealed something that hadn't appeared in any official record. In 1987, she had filed a complaint with the university about Hartwell's research methods. He was conducting unauthorized psychological evaluations on students, she explained. He would identify academically gifted couples and then systematically study their relationship dynamics, often without their knowledge. He kept extensive files on their personal lives, their families, their future plans. When I confronted him about it, he claimed it was legitimate academic research, but there was something predatory about his interest in these young people. The complaint had been buried by the administration. Hartwell was too valuable to the psychology department. His research brought in significant funding, and his academic credentials were impeccable. Instead of investigating Dr. Foster's concerns, the university had quietly transferred her to a different department and given Hartwell a promotion. She left Harvard 2 years later, disgusted by the institution's willingness to protect a colleague she believed was dangerous. Armed with this new information, I returned to Sarah's diary with fresh eyes. Her entries took on a more sinister tone when I understood the full scope of Hartwell's obsession. She had written about feeling watched, about conversations that seemed like interviews, about Hartwell's unusual interest in her relationship with Michael. He asked me today how long Michael and I planned to stay together after graduation, she had written. When I said we were talking about marriage, his eyes lit up in a way that made me uncomfortable. It was like I had given him the answer he was hoping for. I realized that Sarah's investigation into missing students had put her directly in Hartwell's crosshairs. She had unknowingly identified his hunting pattern, making herself and Michael perfect targets. Her academic brilliance, combined with her strong relationship with Michael, had made them irresistible to someone who collected exceptional couples like butterflies pinned to a board. My research led me to a storage facility outside Boston that had been rented under Hartwell's name but abandoned since 1993. The facility manager, a gruff man named Pete, remembered Hartwell well. "Weird guy," Pete told me. "Always coming here at night, bringing boxes, sometimes furniture. Said he was storing research materials. Never caused trouble. Paid his rent on time. But there was something off about him. The way he looked at people, like he was studying them." Pete showed me to Unit 47B, which had been sealed since Hartwell stopped paying rent. Inside, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. The unit was set up like a makeshift laboratory, crossed with a museum. There were dozens of photographs arranged on corkboards. All young couples, all students, their pictures taken from various angles and distances. Some photos appeared to be surveillance shots, taken without the subject's knowledge. In the center of the room stood a large glass display case containing personal items, jewelry, ID cards, pieces of clothing, all carefully labeled with names and dates. Sarah's psychology textbook was there, along with Michael's Harvard rowing team jacket. But they weren't the only ones represented. There were items from all 12 missing couples spanning nearly 2 decades. What made the discovery even more horrifying was the organization. Hartwell had divided the storage unit into sections, each dedicated to a different couple. Every section contained the same elements: surveillance photographs documenting the couple's daily routines, personal items that had been somehow acquired before their disappearance, and detailed psychological profiles written in Hartwell's precise handwriting. He had been watching these students for months, sometimes years, before making his move. I found audio recordings, dozens of them, labeled with dates and names. When I played the first tape, I heard Sarah's voice discussing her thesis research with someone who could only be Hartwell. But this wasn't a normal academic conversation. Hartwell was systematically extracting information about her personal life, her fears, her relationship with Michael. His questions were carefully designed to seem like mentoring, but they were actually psychological mapping sessions. He was learning how to manipulate her, how to gain her trust, how to make her vulnerable. The tapes revealed the full scope of his methodology. Hartwell would identify promising couples through academic records and campus observation. He would then initiate contact under the guise of academic mentorship, slowly building relationships with both partners. Once he had gained their trust, he would begin documenting their every move, recording their conversations, studying their behavioral patterns. The final step was always the same: an invitation to an exclusive opportunity that they couldn't resist. In Michael's section, I found something that made my stomach turn. Hartwell had documented not just Michael's academic achievements and relationship with Sarah, but also his daily exercise routines, his eating habits, his sleep patterns. There were photographs of Michael taken through his dorm window, notes about his conversations with teammates, even samples of his handwriting obtained from assignments. Hartwell had been studying Michael like a laboratory animal, cataloguing every aspect of his existence. The most disturbing discovery was a leather-bound journal that belonged to Hartwell himself. Unlike Sarah's hidden diary, this was his official record of what he called the collection project. The entries spanned 20 years and detailed every aspect of his operation. He wrote about the couples with the detached enthusiasm of a scientist discovering new species. Subject pair 7, Jennifer Thomas, demonstrated exceptional bonding behaviors under stress conditions, one entry read. Their loyalty to each other remained intact even when faced with separation protocols. Remarkable specimens. Separation protocols. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horror of what he was describing. Hartwell hadn't just killed these students, he had experimented on them first. The journal contained references to behavioral modification sessions, isolation studies, and attachment disruption experiments. He had been using these brilliant young people as test subjects in psychological experiments that would have been banned in any legitimate research facility. I found architectural blueprints hidden behind the display cases. They showed the layout of an underground facility, complete with observation rooms, isolation chambers, and what Hartwell referred to as specimen preservation areas. The location wasn't marked on the blueprints, but annotations suggested it was somewhere in rural New Hampshire, about 2 hours from Cambridge. My hand shook as I realized these weren't just plans. They were the blueprints for an operational facility where Hartwell had taken his victims. The blueprint annotations were written in different colored inks, suggesting they had been modified over the years as Hartwell refined his methods. Early versions showed simple containment areas, but later revisions included sophisticated monitoring equipment, soundproofing specifications, and detailed security measures. He had spent decades perfecting his private laboratory, creating the perfect environment for studying human behavior under extreme conditions. Among the papers, I discovered correspondence between Hartwell and suppliers. He had purchased medical equipment, psychological testing materials, and monitoring devices through shell companies he had established. The paper trail showed regular deliveries to a post office box in Lebanon, New Hampshire, throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. These weren't the purchases of a theoretical researcher. They were the tools of someone conducting real experiments on human subjects. The financial records were equally damning. Hartwell had been funding his operation through research grants obtained under false pretenses. He had convinced multiple foundations and government agencies to fund what he described as longitudinal studies of intellectual development in gifted populations. The grant money, totaling over $2 million across 2 decades, had been used to build and maintain his private facility. He had essentially tricked legitimate organizations into funding his twisted collection project. I spent hours in that storage unit, documenting everything with my camera before contacting the authorities. The evidence was overwhelming, but it raised as many questions as it answered. Where exactly was this underground facility? Were any of the victims still alive? Had Hartwell worked alone, or were there others involved in his operation? The answers to these questions would determine whether this was a closed case or an ongoing nightmare. What disturbed me most were the journals. Hartwell had kept detailed notes on each couple, documenting their routines, their relationships, their academic strengths. He had been watching them for months before they disappeared, learning their habits, earning their trust. The final entry for each couple was always the same: subject acquired for permanent study. The clinical coldness of his language made my blood run cold. These weren't just random disappearances, they were methodical abductions carried out by someone who saw brilliant young minds as specimens to be collected. I turned the diary over to the FBI, along with photographs of everything I had found in the storage unit. The investigation was reopened, but Professor Hartwell was never found. Some say he died years ago in Eastern Europe. Others believe he's still out there, perhaps continuing his collection under a different identity. The storage unit revealed enough evidence to officially declare all 12 couples murdered, giving their families some closure after decades of uncertainty. But it also raised new questions that may never be answered. The FBI task force assigned to the case was led by Special Agent Maria Santos, a specialist in serial crimes involving academic institutions. She spent 3 days going through every item in the storage unit, and what she found there launched the largest investigation in Harvard's history. Agent Santos later told me that in her 20 years with the Bureau, she had never encountered a case quite like this one. Most serial killers are disorganized, impulsive, she explained. Hartwell was the opposite. He was methodical, patient, and frighteningly intelligent. He had turned murder into an academic discipline. The search for Hartwell's facility consumed the next 6 months. Using the blueprints and financial records I had discovered, federal agents scoured rural New Hampshire looking for any trace of his operation. They found the post office box in Lebanon, which had been abandoned since December 1992. The postal worker who had serviced that route remembered Hartwell, a quiet man who came for his mail at unusual hours, always paid in cash, never made small talk. But the trail went cold after that. In February 2001, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired state trooper named Bill McCarthy contacted the FBI after seeing news coverage of the case. He remembered pulling over a Harvard professor for speeding back in 1988, somewhere near the Dartmouth College area. The professor had been driving a van loaded with construction materials and had seemed extremely nervous during the traffic stop. McCarthy had written down the license plate number in his log, and it matched one of Hartwell's registered vehicles. Using McCarthy's report as a starting point, agents began searching properties within a 50-mile radius of where the traffic stop had occurred. It took another 2 months, but they finally found it. A seemingly abandoned farmhouse sitting on 40 acres of heavily wooded land. From the outside, it looked like any other rural New England property that had fallen into disrepair. But ground-penetrating radar revealed the truth. There was indeed an extensive underground facility beneath the property, exactly matching Hartwell's blueprints. The excavation that followed was one of the most disturbing crime scenes in FBI history. The underground facility was larger and more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. It contained 12 separate living units, each designed to house a couple for extended periods. The units were comfortable but secure, with observation windows, intercom systems, and environmental controls. It was clear that Hartwell's victims had been kept alive for significant periods while he conducted his experiments. Agent Santos allowed me to visit the site once the initial investigation was complete. Walking through those underground corridors was like entering a nightmare made real. Each living unit contained personal items belonging to one of the missing couples. Sarah and Michael's unit was at the end of the hallway, and seeing it felt like a punch to the gut. Their belongings were arranged exactly as they might have been in a dorm room. Textbooks on a shelf, photographs of friends and family on a small table, Michael's rowing medals hanging on the wall. But the observation window and reinforced door revealed the horrible truth of their final months. The facility's central observation room was the most chilling discovery of all. It contained monitors connected to cameras in each living unit, allowing Hartwell to watch his subjects constantly. There were detailed logs documenting every interaction between the couples, every emotional breakdown, every attempt to escape or communicate with the outside world. Hartwell had watched their deterioration with the same clinical interest a biologist might show when studying insects in a terrarium. But the most horrifying discovery came in what Hartwell had called the preservation room. This area contained evidence that he had indeed been conducting psychological experiments on his victims. There were transcripts of forced separation sessions where couples were isolated from each other to study their behavioral responses. There were records of stress tests, where various psychological pressures were applied to see how the relationships would adapt. The clinical nature of his documentation made it clear that he saw his victims not as people, but as subjects in his private research facility. The forensic team found evidence that the facility had been operational until at least November 1992, just weeks before Hartwell fled Harvard. This meant that some of his victims had been held captive for years before their deaths. Sarah and Michael, being his final subjects, had likely been alive in that underground prison until Hartwell realized that Sarah's investigation was about to expose his operation. The timing of their disappearance, just 2 months before his hasty departure from Harvard, suggested they had been killed to cover his tracks. What haunted me most was discovering Hartwell's final log entry, dated December 10, 1992. Subject pair 12, Sarah Michael, demonstrated exceptional resistance to separation protocols, he wrote. Sarah's analytical abilities made her unsuitable for long-term study. Decision made to terminate collection project and relocate research. Subjects have served their purpose in advancing our understanding of attachment behaviors under extreme conditions. Even in describing murder, he maintained his clinical detachment. The facility also contained evidence that Hartwell hadn't been working alone. There were references in his logs to research partners and collaborative observations. The FBI discovered that he had been in regular contact with at least 3 other individuals, all former students of Dr. Margaret Kellison at Yale. It appeared that Kellison's discredited theories had inspired not just Hartwell, but an entire network of researchers conducting illegal human experiments at universities across the country. This revelation expanded the investigation far beyond Harvard. Similar disappearances were identified at Yale, Princeton, and Columbia, all involving academically gifted couples who had vanished after being approached by trusted authority figures. The FBI now believes that Hartwell's collection project was part of a larger network of underground researchers who had been operating for decades, funded by legitimate academic grants, but conducting experiments that violated every ethical standard in science. The psychological profiles found in the facility revealed the full extent of Hartwell's obsession with intellectual capital. He believed that brilliant minds were too valuable to be wasted on ordinary lives and careers. In his twisted worldview, he was preserving these exceptional individuals by studying them in controlled conditions, preventing their intellectual gifts from being diluted by normal social interactions and career pressures. He saw himself not as a killer, but as a curator of human potential. What happened to the bodies? Where did Hartwell take them for his permanent study? And most haunting of all, were Sarah and Michael still alive when they realized what was happening to them? The diary suggested they trusted Hartwell right until the end, believing they were attending a prestigious study group. I often wonder if Sarah's research skills could have saved them, if she had trusted her instincts sooner, if she had shared her suspicions with authorities instead of just confiding in her diary. The Harvard case changed how I look at the books that come into my shop. Every journal, every diary, every collection of personal papers could contain secrets that someone tried to hide. Sarah's diary had been deliberately disguised in that antique binding, hidden among innocuous family documents for 8 years. Someone, perhaps her grandmother, perhaps Sarah herself before she disappeared, had wanted those words preserved, waiting for the right person to discover them. I've become that person for other families since then, helping solve 3 more cold cases through documents found in estate sales and book collections. The impact of the Hartwell case extended far beyond the 12 couples he had murdered. The FBI investigation revealed institutional failures at Harvard that had enabled his operation for nearly 2 decades. The university was forced to implement new oversight procedures for faculty research, mandatory reporting systems for suspicious behavior, and comprehensive background checks for all academic personnel. Several administrators who had ignored warning signs about Hartwell were quietly dismissed. More troubling was the discovery that similar operations might still be active at other institutions. The network of researchers connected to Dr. Kellison's work had scattered after Hartwell's exposure, but their whereabouts remained unknown. The FBI created a new task force dedicated to investigating suspicious disappearances at universities nationwide, and they asked me to serve as a consultant, helping identify documents that might contain evidence of ongoing crimes. In the 3 years since I found Sarah's diary, I've been contacted by families from across the country. Parents whose children disappeared from college campuses, siblings who never got satisfactory explanations for their loved ones' disappearances, friends who suspected that official investigations had missed crucial evidence. Each case brought new horrors to light, new evidence that Hartwell's collection project was just one branch of a larger tree of academic predators. The psychological toll of this work is considerable. I've seen things in those underground facilities that no person should ever see. I've read journals that documented human suffering on an industrial scale. I've spoken with family members who waited decades for answers about their missing children, only to learn that those children had died in the most horrifying circumstances imaginable. Some nights, I lie awake wondering how many more facilities like Hartwell's exist, hidden beneath the campuses of prestigious institutions, operated by respected professors who see students as experimental subjects rather than human beings. But there have been victories as well. Sarah's diary led to the closure of 5 similar operations across New England. 15 families received answers about their missing children. 3 professors were arrested and convicted of crimes related to illegal human experimentation. The academic community was forced to confront the possibility that its most respected institutions might be harboring predators who hide behind scholarly credentials and research grants. Sarah Chen and Michael Reeves were finally laid to rest in 2003, 11 years after their disappearance. Their families held a joint memorial service on Harvard's campus, attended by hundreds of students and faculty members who wanted to honor their memory. Sarah's thesis on manipulative personality disorders was completed posthumously using her research notes, and it became required reading in Harvard's psychology program. Michael's name was added to the rowing team's memorial plaque, recognizing his contributions to the program he loved. During the memorial service, Sarah's mother approached me to express her gratitude for finding her daughter's diary. Sarah always said she wanted to help solve mysteries, she told me through tears. I guess she found a way to solve her own. Those words have stayed with me, a reminder that even in death, Sarah Chen had been determined to expose the truth about Professor Hartwell and his collection project. The diary itself now sits in the FBI's evidence archives, but its impact continues to resonate. Agent Santos has told me that Sarah's writings have been studied by behavioral analysts, helping them identify warning signs of similar predatory operations at other institutions. Her final investigation, preserved in those hidden pages, has become a training tool for federal agents working to protect students from academic predators. Yet questions remain that may never be answered. The underground facility in New Hampshire contained evidence of at least 30 victims, but only 12 couples were ever officially connected to Hartwell's operation. Where are the others? Were they subjects in different experiments, or were they released after serving their purpose in Hartwell's research? The FBI believes some may still be alive, possibly held at other facilities operated by Hartwell's research partners. Hartwell himself remains at large, despite an international manhunt that has lasted over 2 decades. There have been unconfirmed sightings in Eastern Europe, South America, and Southeast Asia, often at universities or research institutions where his expertise in psychology would make him a valuable faculty member. The FBI's profile suggests he has likely changed his identity and appearance, but his obsession with intellectual capital makes it probable that he's still involved in academic circles somewhere in the world. The most chilling possibility is that Hartwell's work has evolved and expanded. His journals contained references to next-generation collection protocols and digital surveillance enhancement projects. Law enforcement experts believe he may have adapted his methods to the internet age, using online platforms to identify and track potential victims before making physical contact. The same methodical approach that made him so successful at Harvard could make him even more dangerous in an interconnected world. I think about Sarah and Michael often, especially when I'm closing up the shop late at night. They were so young, so brilliant, so full of potential. They had planned to change the world. Sarah through her research into criminal psychology, Michael through his medical career. Instead, they became subjects in someone else's twisted research project. Their lives ended not by accident or illness, but by a predator who saw their intellectual gifts as specimens to be collected and studied. Their story serves as a warning about the dangers that can lurk within even the most prestigious institutions. Universities are built on trust. Trust between students and faculty, trust that research is conducted ethically, trust that academic credentials indicate moral as well as intellectual qualifications. Hartwell exploited that trust systematically, using his position and reputation to gain access to vulnerable young people who never suspected that their mentor was actually their predator. But the Harvard case also demonstrates the power of persistence and the importance of preserving personal narratives. Sarah's diary, hidden for 8 years, ultimately brought justice for 12 couples and exposed a network of academic predators that might still be operating today. Her words, preserved in black ink on white paper, became her final gift to the world, a testament to the importance of questioning authority, trusting instincts, and never stopping the search for truth. As I write this, it's been over 20 years since Sarah Chen and Michael Reeves disappeared from Harvard's campus. Their killer remains at large, and similar operations may still be active at universities around the world. But their story lives on, told through Sarah's own words and serving as a warning to future generations of students. Sometimes the most important mysteries are the ones we solve after it's too late to save the victims, but just in time to protect those who might be next. The collection project may have ended, but the search for Professor Edmund Hartwell continues. Somewhere out there, he may still be watching, still cataloging, still collecting. And somewhere else, another student might be writing in a diary, documenting suspicious behavior from a trusted mentor, not knowing that those words could someday bring justice to victims whose voices were silenced by academic predators. The cycle continues, but now we know what to look for, thanks to Sarah Chen's final investigation. But the Harvard case still keeps me awake at night. There's something about the clinical precision of Hartwell's methods, the way he studied these young couples like specimens in a lab, that feels uniquely evil. Sarah and Michael weren't just murdered, they were collected, preserved, turned into objects for one man's twisted research. The FBI believes there may be other professors, other collectors, still operating at universities around the world. They've asked me to watch for similar patterns in any documents that come through my shop. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm closing up the store, I think about Sarah's final diary entry. They're not just studying us, they're collecting us. Those words haunt me because they suggest she understood in those final moments that she and Michael weren't just victims of a crime. They were specimens in someone's private museum, their brilliance and potential preserved forever in the most horrifying way possible. Their story didn't end with graduation and successful careers. It ended in Professor Hartwell's collection, alongside 11 other couples whose dreams were cut short by one man's obsession with academic perfection. The diary now sits in an FBI evidence locker, but I made copies of several pages before turning it over. Sarah's handwriting, her growing fear, her desperate attempts to protect herself and Michael, all of it preserved in black ink on white paper. Sometimes I wonder if she knew somehow that her words would eventually find their way to someone who could help. Her diary became her final investigation, the one that finally brought justice to 12 missing couples and their families. It took 8 years, But Sarah Chen got the last word on Professor Edmund Hartwell and his collection. What do you think really happened to Sarah and Michael? Did they discover too much about the collection, or was their disappearance always part of Hartwell's plan? Share your theories in the comments below.